It was a day that would change the course of history. A day when a rookie pilot would face down one of the deadliest men in the skies. The year was 1943, and the Allied forces were engaged in a fierce, unrelenting air war over Europe. The P-51 Mustang had proven itself as one of the most formidable fighters in the skies, but it was the men inside the cockpit who would make the real difference. And on that day, it was Lieutenant James "Jim" Palmer, a young pilot with little more than a handful of combat hours under his belt, who would face Germany's most feared ace, Hans "the Hammer" Müller. The Messerschmitt Bf 109, the deadly weapon flown by Müller, was one of the most advanced fighters of the war. It had the speed, maneuverability, and firepower that made it a terror in the skies. Müller himself had a reputation that struck fear into the hearts of the bravest pilots. With over 200 confirmed kills, he was a legend, a man who had struck terror across Europe. The Allies knew that as long as Müller was in the sky, the odds were never truly in their favor. But that day, things would be different. The mission was simple enough. Provide air cover for the bombers on a routine raid over occupied France. The skies were clear, the sun rising over the horizon, and the noise of the engines blended with the murmurs of the pilots in their cockpits. Jim Palmer, a newly minted fighter pilot, was flying his first combat sortie of the day with the 8th Air Force. His orders were clear: protect the bombers and engage any enemy fighters. However, no one had prepared him for what he would face that day. As the bomber formation advanced toward their target, the radar operators picked up the first signs of enemy activity. "Bandits inbound, 12 o'clock high," the warning came over the radio. The call was instant. The Luftwaffe was coming. Then, a voice broke through the static on the frequency, one that Palmer had only heard in whispers from the more seasoned pilots. "It's Müller." The radio fell silent for a moment. Palmer's heart skipped a beat. The Me-109 was a fighter the Allies had feared for years, and Hans Müller was its master. The German ace was known for his brutal, no-holds-barred style of aerial combat, and the stories of his attacks were legendary. To face him was an honor for some, a nightmare for others. But for Palmer, who had never faced a challenge like this before, it was a trial by fire. The voice of his squadron leader, Captain Hank Williams, cut through the tension. "Stay close to the bombers, Palmer. Don't engage unless absolutely necessary. We'll handle this." But Palmer wasn't ready to sit back. He wasn't a man who would just follow orders. He was a man who had trained for this moment. The P-51 Mustang he was flying wasn't just a machine. It was his chance to prove himself. And as the Me-109S came into view, Palmer could already feel the pull of something deeper. The fierce desire to rise above the odds, to face the enemy head-on, and to be the pilot who turned the tide. Palmer's Mustang roared to life as he throttled up, the powerful Merlin engine responding beneath him. The Me-10-9s had already begun their attack run on the bombers, diving toward them like deadly predators. The air was thick with the sound of engines, and the first flashes of gunfire lit the sky as the German fighters opened fire. For Palmer, there was no turning back. This wasn't just a fight for survival. This was a chance to prove he was more than just a rookie. This was a chance to define who he was as a pilot. As the first of the Me-10-9s broke through the bomber formation, Palmer followed instinctively. He didn't know what the outcome would be. He didn't know if he'd make it out alive. But in that moment, he knew one thing for sure. He was ready to face whatever came next. The first burst of tracer fire lit up the sky as Müller's Me-109S tore into the bomber formation. Palmer's heart pounded in his chest as he watched the enemy aircraft flash by, their guns spitting fire. The sound of machine guns and cannon fire filled the air, a savage orchestra of war. Palmer gritted his teeth, his fingers tightening around the controls of the P-51 Mustang as the battlefield erupted around him. He was no longer a rookie. This was no longer a training exercise. This was real. "Red leader, bandits at 12 o'clock, Palmer shouted over the radio, his voice steady despite the rising adrenaline. "Stay sharp, Jim. Don't engage unless you have to." Captain Williams's voice came through, calm but firm. The seasoned leader knew the stakes. Miller wasn't just another enemy ace. He was a legend. And Palmer, in his first true combat experience, was facing the enemy at their most lethal. But Palmer didn't hesitate. This was his moment. The P-51 Mustang was a powerful machine, and while it wasn't as fast as the Me-109, it had agility on its side. The trick wasn't to match Miller's speed. It was to outmaneuver him. Palmer had been trained to think ahead, to anticipate moves and react to the enemy's weaknesses. Miller, for all his legendary prowess, couldn't outfly his own limitations. The bomber formation was now under fire, the Me-10-9s darting in and out like sharks circling prey. Palmer knew that time was running out for the bombers. They needed protection. He couldn't afford to think about the jet or the ace behind the controls. He needed to think about the mission. Palmer lined up behind one of Miller's wingmen, a Me-109, diving toward the bombers. The German pilot was too focused on his target to notice the incoming Mustang. Palmer adjusted his throttle and prepared to make his move. The Mustang's 6.50 caliber Browning machine guns were deadly. He just needed to get close enough. Suddenly, the air was split by the deafening roar of another Me-109 diving straight toward him. It was Mueller, the ace, the man who had killed countless Allied pilots, and who had instilled fear in every corner of Europe. He was coming for Palmer. Palmer's instincts kicked in. Miller's plane was faster, but not by much. He couldn't afford to let the German ace dictate the pace of the fight. The P-51 Mustang had better agility, and Palmer knew he had one shot at getting the advantage. McConnell pulled hard on the controls, sending the Mustang into a sharp climb. The Me-109's high-speed dive meant it would overshoot him momentarily. Mueller was fast, but he couldn't match Palmer's maneuver. McConnell twisted the Mustang's controls, pushing the aircraft into a tight roll, a move designed to get him into the perfect firing position. Mueller didn't expect it. The Me-109's nose dipped as it passed by Palmer's P-51 Mustang, and for a split second McConnell had his shot. He squeezed the trigger and the Mustang's guns erupted in a burst of flame. Tracers flew past the 109's wings, and Palmer saw the jet shudder as it took the hit. But Mueller wasn't out yet. The German ace pulled his aircraft up sharply, trying to evade the Mustang's fire. Palmer banked hard left, following the Me-109's evasive maneuvers. The dogfight was in full swing now. The skies seemed to narrow, the two aircraft dancing between clouds as they tore through the atmosphere, locked in a battle of wits and instinct. Palmer's mind raced as he evaluated his next move. Miller was fast, but Palmer had patience. The Mustang's agility allowed him to stay in the fight longer than most aircraft would have, and as Miller tried another move to shake him off, Palmer saw an opening. The German ace pulled up, but the angle was steep, and for just a moment, the Me-109's tail was exposed. Palmer adjusted the P-51's nose, diving toward the Me-109 and keeping his sights fixed on the vulnerable target. Miller's Me-109 was struggling. The engine screamed as it tried to climb, but Palmer knew it was already losing power. Miller had no idea that he was being outmaneuvered. Palmer squeezed the trigger again, sending another burst of fire into the Me-109's wing root. There was a sickening flash as the 109's left wing exploded in a burst of flame. The aircraft spiraled downward, smoke billowing from its broken fuselage. McConnell pulled up hard, watching as Miller's plane descended in flames, a trail of black smoke rising behind it. Miller was gone. The radio was silent for a moment. Palmer's heart was still racing as he leveled his Mustang, breathing heavily. His hands gripped the controls as he looked down at the wreckage of the Me-109 that had once seemed so unstoppable. It was now a burning heap of metal. "You did it, Jim! You really did it!" Williams's voice came through the radio, and for the first time that day, Palmer allowed himself to breathe. He had done the impossible. A rookie pilot, with no reputation, had faced down Germany's most feared ace and won. But even as the bombers completed their run and the air cleared, McConnell couldn't quite believe what had just happened. It wasn't about the victory. It was about the moment, the realization that sometimes it wasn't about being the fastest or the strongest. It was about outthinking the enemy and being willing to take the risks that others wouldn't. The war was far from over, and the fight for air superiority was still a long way from being decided. But for Palmer, in that single moment, he had proven that even the most skilled opponent could be defeated by courage, quick thinking, and a steady hand. The skies above Europe were about to witness something that seemed almost impossible. A battle between a rookie pilot in a propeller-driven Mustang and Hans the Hammer Miller, Germany's most feared ace, flying the deadly Me-109. The tension in the air was palpable as the two aircraft closed in for the clash. Palmer's P-51 Mustang hummed beneath him, every part of his body attuned to the upcoming battle. There was no turning back now. Miller had already proven himself as a skilled predator in the skies. His Me-109, a weapon of fear. But Palmer was different. He had the fire of a rookie eager to prove himself, and above all, he had instinct, a trait that had kept him alive through countless near misses. Now, it was his biggest weapon. The Me-109 came into view, a flash of silver against the clouded sky. It was fast, sharp, and relentless. Miller had already begun his attack run, barreling toward the bomber formation, intent on tearing through it. Palmer knew the drill. He had flown countless missions to protect these bombers, but this time was different. This wasn't just another dogfight. This was a fight for survival against the man who had destroyed countless Allied pilots. Palmer's heart raced, his breath shallow as he locked eyes on the Me-109. The distance between them closed with dizzying speed. His mind was clear now. There was no room for doubt, no time for second-guessing. He was in the fight, and he had a single goal: keep Muller from reaching the bombers. "Red leader to Red 4, stay close. Don't let him break down through the formation." Captain Williams's voice was steady, a voice Palmer had come to rely on, but the gravity of the situation hung heavily in the air. The two planes twisted and turned through the sky in a deadly ballet. Palmer's P-51 Mustang was built for agility, and he knew how to use it. The Me-109 was faster, more powerful, but it was also predictable. Palmer knew that if he could outmaneuver Miller, if he could force the German ace to make a mistake, there might be a chance. As the Me-109 broke away from its attack run, Palmer immediately followed. The move was risky. Miller was one of the best pilots in the world, and he had years of experience. But Palmer was determined. He pushed the throttle of his Mustang forward, feeling the engine roar to life beneath him. Speed. That was what would give him the advantage. Miller's jet sliced through the air, banking hard to the left, his sleek machine turning with precision. Palmer was right behind him, keeping close, his eyes locked onto the Me-109's tail. This wasn't just another fight. This was the fight, the one that could define everything. "Come on, Jim. You've got this." The words echoed in Palmer's mind. His hands were steady as he prepared for the next move. The Me-109 was beginning to climb, attempting to distance itself. But Palmer had already anticipated this. The jet was relying on its speed. But speed wasn't enough when you had the right maneuver. Palmer broke sharply to the right, diving toward the 109's exposed tail. The P-51 Mustang responded instantly, cutting through the air with the agility Palmer needed. Miller was trying to climb again, trying to outpace him, but in doing so he was losing control of the engagement. The Me-109's engines weren't built for sustained climbing. While powerful, they were no match for the P-51 Mustang's agility. The two planes spun through the air, weaving through the clouds, but Palmer's Mustang remained on the German's tail. His fingers brushed the firing button as he adjusted his sights. He knew he had only one chance to take the shot. Then it came. The moment. Palmer squeezed the trigger, and the Mustang's 6.50 caliber Browning machine guns exploded into action. Tracer rounds lit up the sky, cutting through the smoke-filled air, and Palmer watched as the rounds struck the Me-109's engine. The German jet's nose dipped sharply as the engine sputtered. For a brief moment, everything seemed to freeze. The roar of the engines, the crackle of the radio, the endless whir of the machines. All of it felt like a distant hum. Miller didn't give up easily, though. He fought back, trying to regain control of his faltering jet. The Me-109 began to spiral downward, smoke pouring from its damaged engine. But Palmer wasn't done. He pushed the Mustang forward, staying on Miller's tail, ensuring the kill. "Red 4! He's going down!" Captain Williams's voice echoed through the radio, but McConnell's mind was elsewhere. The fight was over. The enemy ace was defeated. But the reality hadn't sunk in yet. The Me-109 was a ball of flame now, hurtling toward the ground below. McConnell pulled the Mustang into a climb, watching the burning wreckage of the Me-109 fall away. He had done it. He had killed the legend. The radio came alive, the voices of the other pilots filling the airwaves. "You got him, Jim! You actually did it!" "No way! You took down Muller!" But Palmer didn't hear the excitement, didn't hear the praise. He was still caught in the gravity of the moment. His pulse was racing, his body still locked in the tension of the fight. Muller, the man who had been the embodiment of the Luftwaffe's fearsome reputation, was now just a pile of wreckage, and Palmer was the one who had brought him down. But even as he circled the sky, a strange feeling washed over him. The adrenaline was fading, and the weight of what had just happened began to sink in. The rookie pilot, the man with no combat experience, had just defeated Germany's most feared ace. McConnell couldn't help but feel a sense of disbelief, a fleeting moment where reality seemed to blur. His training, his instincts, and his sheer determination had all led him to this moment. It wasn't about being the best pilot in the world. It was about doing what had to be done in the face of the impossible. The P-51 Mustang had done its job, but McConnell had done more than just fly the plane. He had fought, and he had won. The news of the kill spread quickly, and by the time McConnell's Mustang touched down at the airfield, the sound of his engines barely drowned out the chatter that buzzed around him. The Me-109 was gone, its wreckage smoldering in the field below, a symbol of both McConnell's improbable victory and the shifting tides of the war. He had faced down Hans the Hammer Miller, Germany's most feared ace, and emerged victorious. But as McConnell climbed out of his cockpit and onto the tarmac, he was still grappling with the enormity of what had just happened. "You did it, Jim!" Lieutenant Foster shouted as he jogged toward McConnell, his face beaming with excitement. McConnell gave a tired smile, wiping sweat from his brow. He hadn't expected to feel this way, stunned, almost numb. It wasn't the victory itself that was sinking in, it was the realization that, in a single moment, his life had changed forever. The rookie pilot had taken down one of the deadliest men in the skies, a pilot whose name had struck fear into the hearts of the best Allied aviators. And McConnell had done it with nothing more than courage, instinct, and the will to survive. The radio crackled as Captain Hank Williams came over the airwaves. "Red leader to Red 4. Come in." McConnell adjusted his headset, but before he could respond, Williams's voice continued, more serious than ever. "McConnell, you did it. You've made history. But remember, this isn't just about you. It's about all of us. Don't let it go to your head." McConnell nodded, a wry grin crossing his face. Williams was right. The victory felt monumental, but the war wasn't over. It was just another battle, and the Allies still had a long road ahead of them. The German jet forces had only just begun to arrive, and Miller's death, while significant, didn't end the threat. Miller's shadow still loomed over the skies. Later that day, McConnell sat down with his squadron leaders in the debriefing room. As he recounted the dogfight, the tension in the room became palpable. They asked about his every move, his every decision. How had he known to climb when the Me-109 went into a dive? How had he anticipated Miller's next maneuver? McConnell didn't have answers. He had simply reacted, following his instincts, knowing that he could outmaneuver the enemy if given the chance. As he spoke, it became clear that McConnell's victory wasn't about superior aircraft or firepower. It was about the human element, about using intelligence and calm in the face of overwhelming odds. The P-51 Mustang had its advantages, but McConnell had used his instincts, his training, and his courage to force Muller into an untenable position. That was what had led to victory. Not speed, not technology, but the will to act when everything seemed impossible. For the next several days, McConnell was the talk of the base. His story was featured in the military briefings, and word spread like wildfire across the Allied forces. The rookie pilot who had taken down Germany's most feared ace became a symbol of what courage and determination could achieve. But McConnell wasn't one for the spotlight. Despite the accolades and recognition, he remained humble, quietly going about his work, preparing for the next mission. "You've got the world's attention now, Jim. Don't let it change you." Williams's words stayed with him as the days passed. McConnell wasn't interested in fame or glory. He had done his duty, and that was all that mattered. But something had shifted within him, something he hadn't fully realized until he sat alone, reflecting on what he had just accomplished. In the days that followed, the Allied air forces reevaluated their strategies against the German jet threat. McConnell's victory, while a symbol of hope, also highlighted the vulnerabilities of these advanced jets. Speed alone was not enough to guarantee victory, as Muller had learned. Tactics, instincts, and the will to fight were just as important. McConnell's story began to inspire a new generation of pilots. His victory wasn't just about shooting down an enemy ace, it was a lesson in the power of human ingenuity over mechanical superiority. The story of how a rookie pilot had defeated one of the deadliest pilots in the world spread beyond military circles and into the broader narrative of the war. Years later, McConnell was invited to share his story at flight schools, military conventions, and Air Force academies. He would often be asked about his tactics, the mindset that had allowed him to take on a legendary adversary and come out on top. He would always give the same simple answer: "I did what I had to do to survive." But for those who had heard the story, it was more than just survival. It was about defying expectations, about proving that anything was possible. McConnell's place in history was secure, but for him it wasn't about the recognition. It was about the deeper truth he had learned that day. The human spirit, when pushed to its limits, could still achieve the impossible. Technology and machines may evolve, but it was still the pilot's mind and heart that determined the outcome of the battle. As McConnell moved on with his life long after the war had ended, he carried with him the lessons of that fateful day. The story of the rookie pilot who took down the ace would continue to inspire for generations to come. It wasn't just about the kill, it was about the courage to act, the instinct to survive, and the willingness to face the impossible head-on. And so McConnell's legacy as a pilot lived on, not just in the history books, but in the hearts of every pilot who dared to fly into the unknown. The Me-109 was no longer the symbol of invincibility, and neither was Miller. Victory, McConnell had shown, was more than just a matter of who had the fastest plane. It was about who had the courage to stay in the fight and never back down.